The year was 1941, and over the vast, shimmering expanse of the Pacific Ocean, a new predator ruled the sky. Its name was whispered with awe and dread alike, the Mitsubishi A6M0. To the Japanese, it was racing, the pure embodiment of imperial precision and grace. To American pilots, it was something else entirely, the devil in the clouds. The Zero was unlike anything the world had ever seen. It was light, impossibly agile, and hauntingly beautiful in motion, like a white ghost drifting through sunlight. When it turned, it seemed to pivot on a pin. When it climbed, it did so with the smoothness of a rising hawk. In the early days of the war, this sleek, ivory-winged machine carried Japan's ambitions on its back, from the skies over China to the farthest edges of the Pacific. Allied pilots quickly learned a single rule: never dogfight a Zero. You could see it, you could chase it, but you would never catch it. The plane's design philosophy was as pure as it was deadly. Every ounce of unnecessary weight was stripped away. Armor? None. Self-sealing fuel tanks? Too heavy. Safety was sacrificed for agility. The result was a flying blade, one that could slice, twist, and vanish before the enemy even fired a shot. When Japan launched its surprise attack on Pearl Harbor on the morning of December 7, 1941, the world changed forever. Across the pale Hawaiian sky, 343 aircraft screamed down upon the American fleet, torpedo bombers, dive bombers, and the deadly escorting Zeros. Their engines whined like hornets, their machine guns spat red-orange flame, and below, the pride of the U.S. Navy erupted in fire and oil. Battleship Row burned. The air was filled with black smoke, the thunder of explosions, and the screams of dying men. And above it all, the Zeros weaved effortlessly through flak bursts and tracer fire, dancing in and out of the smoke as if untouchable. For the men below, the sight was unforgettable. The Zero wasn't just a machine, it was a symbol of Japanese mastery. In the weeks that followed, that same symbol appeared again and again, at Wake Island, the Philippines, Burma, Singapore, the Coral Sea. Everywhere it went, the story was the same. Allied fighters tried to challenge the Zero, and failed miserably. Pilots returned from missions shaken, describing an enemy that could turn inside them, climb above them, and vanish at will. They were fighting ghosts, ghosts with guns. American pilots flying outdated Curtiss P-40 Warhawks, F-2A Buffaloes, and F-4F Wildcats soon realized that their aircraft were no match. The Wildcat, though sturdy, was slow and heavy. It could take damage, yes, but it couldn't escape or pursue. In a one-on-one dogfight, a Zero would always have the upper hand. The sky had become Japanese territory. The rise of the Zero wasn't just technological, it was psychological. It demoralized opponents. It gave Japan a sense of invincibility. The Emperor's pilots, young men barely in their 20s, flew with a calm, lethal discipline. Many had trained for years in China before the Pacific War, perfecting tactics like climbing spirals, slashing dives, and coordinated wing maneuvers. In battle, they moved as one, a flock of predatory birds guided by instinct and mastery. One such pilot was Saburo Sakai, a name that became legend among both friend and foe. Sakai, who came from humble beginnings, flew with an unmatched combination of patience and ferocity. His Zero carried a painted chrysanthemum near the tail, a small symbol of luck. In one engagement over Java, he single-handedly took on a formation of Allied bombers and fighters, shooting down multiple planes before limping home with his cockpit shattered and one eye blinded by shrapnel. When asked why he didn't bail out, Sakai simply said, "A warrior does not surrender his machine to the enemy." For pilots like him, the Zero was not just an aircraft, it was an extension of their soul, a way to touch the divine. Each takeoff was a prayer. Each dogfight, a test of spirit. To the Allies it seemed unstoppable. They called it the Zeke, but that nickname failed to capture its elegance and terror. It could appear from the sun, firing short, precise bursts, then vanish into a roll so tight no Western aircraft could follow. When American pilots first faced it, many mistook it for something supernatural. Reports flooded in describing impossible maneuvers, 90-degree climbs, full loops, vertical spirals. Some even believed the Japanese were using oxygen boosters or rocket assistance. In truth, it was simply brilliant engineering. The Zero weighed less than 6,000 pounds, hundreds lighter than its adversaries, yet its 940 horsepower Sake engine gave it a top speed over 330 miles per hour. Its long, graceful wings provided extraordinary lift, and its light controls made it agile even at slow speeds. Against that, the American pilot's armor and fuel protection seemed useless, because you couldn't protect yourself from something that never missed. By early 1942, morale among Allied airmen was crumbling. Over the Coral Sea, Java, and the Philippines, entire squadrons were erased. Pilots began to improvise, using high-speed dives to escape, using the sun to blind their attackers, and learning to fight in pairs rather than alone. But even then, the odds were bleak. The Zero's dominance defined the first stage of the Pacific War. It was Japan's sword, sharp, fast, and precise. And for a time, it seemed nothing could dull its edge. Yet while Japanese engineers celebrated their masterpiece across the ocean, in quiet American factories, a new idea was forming. The engineers at Grumman Aircraft Engineering Corporation, based in Bethpage, Long Island, were known for their rugged designs. They had built the F4F Wildcat, a tough little fighter that took a beating and came home, but it simply couldn't compete with the Zero's speed and grace. Still, Grumman's founder, Leroy Grumman, wasn't discouraged. "We don't need to copy them," he told his engineers one cold evening in 1942. "We need to outthink them." In rooms filled with the smell of oil and metal, blueprints stretched across drafting tables. Pencils scratched. Engines roared in test stands. The designers studied every report from the Pacific, every weakness, every story of a downed pilot, every encounter with the Zero. They realized something vital. The Zero's strength was also its weakness. It was fast and agile because it was fragile. One burst of .50 caliber fire could turn it into a burning torch. If America could build something that could survive a hit, deliver heavier firepower, and still fly fast enough to chase the Zero down, the balance could shift. That was the goal. That was the challenge. For months, engineers toiled in secrecy. Prototypes were built, tested, destroyed, rebuilt. The sound of rivet guns echoed through Grumman's hangars like war drums. Outside, snow fell on the rooftops, and factory lights glowed long into the night. Men and women worked side by side, machinists, draftsmen, engineers, test pilots, all driven by one purpose: to build a plane that could win back the Pacific skies. And slowly, from that storm of ideas, something began to take shape. It wasn't sleek like the Zero. It wasn't delicate. It was broad-shouldered, thick-skinned, and powerful. It looked less like a bird and more like a predator. When the first test model rolled out of the hangar, one mechanic laughed and said, "Looks like a wildcat that's been hitting the gym." The engineers smiled. That's exactly what they wanted. This new fighter would be stronger, faster, and far deadlier. It would have a 2,000 horsepower Pratt Whitney engine, 6 Browning .50 caliber machine guns, self-sealing tanks, and armor plating around the pilot. It could take damage and keep flying, something no Zero could dream of. But for now, it remained a secret, a promise. The war raged on. The Japanese still ruled the skies. The Zero, with its soft metallic whine and pearl-white fuselage, continued to dominate battlefields across the Pacific. Every sunset over the ocean still seemed painted with the rising sun. Yet in the shadows of Grumman's hangars, a storm was gathering. The engineers called their creation the F6F Hellcat, a name that would soon become a roar echoing through the Pacific. But in 1941, no one knew. Not yet. The Zero's empire of the air was still unbroken. For the men who fought beneath its shadow, survival meant learning humility and waiting for hope to take flight. The Pacific was vast, brutal, and merciless. Every carrier battle, every island skirmish, every dawn patrol felt like rolling dice with death. Yet within that chaos, American pilots began to whisper rumors that somewhere back home, a new fighter was coming. Something stronger. Something meaner. Something that could finally stand up to the Japanese Zero. For now, though, the sky belonged entirely to Japan. And the Zero, gleaming in sunlight, with its red roundel burning on its wings, ruled as an undisputed king. By the spring of 1943, the Pacific had become a graveyard of steel and wings. Smoke drifted over shattered islands, and the once invincible Zero was still the master of the skies. Every American pilot who climbed into his cockpit knew the odds were stacked against him. They flew anyway, because that's what courage demanded. But change was coming, whispered first, then felt, then seen roaring over the horizon. The Grumman factory in Bethpage, New York, had come alive like a living organism. The floor trembled under the pounding of rivet guns, the hiss of welding torches, and the constant rumble of testing engines. What had begun as a dream on a blueprint was now a beast of aluminum and power, the F6F Hellcat. It was not graceful like the Zero, not elegant. It was muscular, purposeful, and unyielding. Its broad fuselage housed the massive Pratt Whitney R. 2800 double Wasp engine, 18 cylinders of American fury. When that engine roared to life, the ground itself seemed to vibrate. The Hellcat was born not out of arrogance, but out of desperation. America needed something that could not only survive but dominate. When the prototype, the XF6F1, first took to the air in mid-1942, test pilot Bob Hall described it simply. "It feels right. It feels mean." The engineers grinned. That was exactly the point. Every lesson learned from the brutal defeats of 1941 and 1942 was etched into this machine. The cockpit was spacious, visibility excellent, the wings strong enough to take carrier landings again and again. Its 6 Browning .50 caliber machine guns could tear a plane apart in a single burst. But what made the Hellcat truly dangerous wasn't its raw power, it was its balance. It could climb, dive, and roll with precision. It could fight on equal terms with the Zero, and live to tell the tale. The first Hellcats began rolling off assembly lines at astonishing speed. Women in coveralls and scarves, America's Rosie the Riveters, bolted and riveted, painted and polished, sending hundreds of these metal beasts into the world each month. Their hands built the wings that would change history. Soon, Hellcats began appearing aboard American carriers, the Essex, the Yorktown, the Bunker Hill. Pilots looked at them with skepticism at first. Many had lost friends to the Zero. They'd seen too many flaming parachutes, too many funerals at sea. Could this bulky, wide-winged brute really challenge Japan's legendary fighter? The first real test came over the Solomon Islands. It was a blistering morning, the ocean beneath shimmering like glass. A formation of Japanese Zeros approached from the east, sunlight glinting off their silver wings. They expected another easy hunt. The radio chatter was confident, even mocking. Another Yankee patrol, one pilot laughed. Let's send them swimming. But these Yankees weren't flying Wildcats anymore. As the two groups closed, the Japanese pilots noticed something odd. The American planes were faster, climbing higher, turning sharper, refusing to fall into the same traps. The first bursts of fire came from 6.50 caliber guns, their tracers slicing across the sky in golden arcs. A Zero exploded instantly, its wings shearing off in a burst of flame. The others dove to engage, but the Hellcats dove faster. When they tried to climb, the Hellcats followed. One Japanese pilot, Lieutenant Satoshi Anabuki, would later recall in his diary, "We underestimated them. These new blue fighters were not the same clumsy machines as before. They came like angry demons. We could not shake them." That was the beginning of the end. As the months rolled on, the Hellcat became the backbone of the U.S. Navy's air power. It wasn't just a fighter, it was a machine built for vengeance. American pilots who once feared the Zero now began to hunt them. They learned new tactics, using the Hellcat's superior dive speed and roll rate to strike from above. The old rule, never dogfight a Zero, was replaced by a new one, never underestimate a Hellcat. In combat, the difference was staggering. The Zero still turned tighter, yes, but the Hellcat could take punishment that would rip a Japanese plane apart. Its armor absorbed hits. Its self-sealing tanks stopped fires. Pilots who were once shot down in flames now returned to their carriers with bullet holes and stories of survival. The balance had shifted. By late 1943, the Hellcat had achieved air superiority. Over the Philippine Sea, over the Marshall Islands, and across the endless Pacific, it began carving a legend of its own. One mission stands out, the Battle of the Philippine Sea, June 19, 1944. The Japanese launched their largest carrier attack of the war, more than 400 aircraft screaming toward the American fleet. The Hellcats were waiting. It began at dawn. The sky filled with distant black dots, Zeros, dive bombers, torpedo planes, wave after wave. The call went out. All hands to battle stations. Hellcat engines roared to life, carriers rocking with power as squadrons launched into the air. Within minutes, the blue sky turned into chaos. The Hellcats formed a wall, tight formations, perfectly drilled. The Japanese came in fast, confident from past victories. They had no idea they were flying into a slaughter. Lieutenant Alex Vreshu, flying an F6F Hellcat, shot down 6 enemy planes in just 8 minutes. His guns blazed continuously, his voice calm over the radio. Scratch 1 bandit, scratch 2, 3, 4. When he landed, his ammo was gone, his plane riddled with holes, but he was alive. The Japanese weren't so lucky. By the end of that day, the U.S. Navy had destroyed nearly 350 Japanese aircraft. The battle became known as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. The numbers were unbelievable. Japan had lost almost 3/4 of its attacking force in a single day. 75% of their experienced carrier pilots were gone. The Zero, once the hunter, had become the hunted. For Japan, it was more than a defeat. It was the beginning of the collapse of their air power. Their factories could still build planes, but they could no longer replace the pilots lost in the Pacific. The Zero, for all its beauty, had become a symbol of a bygone age, an elegant killer in a world that now demanded brute strength and resilience. The Hellcat, by contrast, was an industrial miracle. Built in massive numbers, over 12,000 by war's end, it was reliable, forgiving, and deadly. Pilots called it a gentleman's fighter. It saved lives. It turned rookies into aces. It gave America the confidence it had lost in 1941. In every carrier-ready room, young aviators watched gun camera footage of their new aircraft cutting through Zeros like paper. They no longer feared the rising sun emblem, they hunted it. And for every burning Zero that fell into the sea, another piece of Japan's illusion of invincibility went with it. Yet even amid victory, respect remained. Many Hellcat pilots admitted admiration for the Zero and the men who flew it. They were brave, said Commander David McCampbell, America's top Navy ace. They fought to the last man. But war is war, and we had the better machine. By 1944, the The Pacific skies no longer belonged to Japan. The once proud Zero squadrons were reduced to defending small island bases, flying fewer sorties, often with inexperienced recruits. The Hellcat now ruled the air, from the Marianas to Okinawa. And with it came a new rhythm of war, precision strikes, island by island, always moving closer to Tokyo. On the decks of American carriers, pilots stood in silence before missions, watching the sunrise turn the ocean gold. They knew each flight could be their last. Yet there was a quiet confidence now, the kind born not from arrogance, but from knowing you were flying the best machine in the sky. When the engine started, the deck shook. When the catapult fired, they were airborne in seconds, climbing into a dawn that once belonged to Japan but now belonged to them. The Hellcat became more than a fighter. It became a symbol. It represented the might of American industry, the ingenuity of its engineers, and the courage of its pilots. Every rivet, every bullet hole, every oil-streaked wing carried the story of a nation that refused to kneel. For the Japanese, it was a grim realization. Their beloved Zero, once the angel of victory, now met its match. The gull wings of the Corsair, the booming engines of the Thunderbolt, the sleek lines of the Mustang, all had joined the sky war. But it was the Hellcat that bore the heaviest burden and delivered the most crushing blow. By the end of the war, Hellcat pilots claimed over 5,000 enemy aircraft destroyed, an astonishing record unmatched by any naval fighter in history. The kill ratio was staggering, 19-1 in favor of the Hellcat. In the shattered airfields of Japan, the truth could no longer be denied. The sky no longer sang the song of the Zero. It now thundered with the growl of the Hellcat. For those who had once mocked it, those who had laughed at America's early failures, the laughter was gone, replaced by silence, and the sound of waves breaking over wreckage. The empire that once ruled the Pacific had met a machine built not for beauty, but for endurance. And in the end, endurance triumphed. Soft orchestral rise, faint echoes of engines fading into peace. Japanese pilots were shocked when America's F6F Hellcat destroyed 75 of their fleet. The underestimated cat had ruled the Pacific skies. By late 1943, the tide of war had begun to shift, though few yet realized how much. The F6F Hellcat had arrived in the Pacific, and with it came a quiet, relentless storm that would soon sweep across every island and ocean front. The first time a Zero pilot saw the silhouette of the Hellcat, he likely thought it was just another American Wildcat, a mistake that would cost him his life within seconds. The Hellcat looked bulky, slower, heavier, but beneath its rugged frame was pure, precise lethality. Its massive Pratt Whitney R-2800 double Wasp engine roared with nearly 2,000 horsepower, a beast's heart wrapped in armor and steel. It could climb faster, dive steeper, and most importantly, survive hits that would turn a Zero into falling ash. Japanese pilots were used to dueling fragile opponents, planes that burned with one well-placed burst. But the Hellcat, it didn't burn easily. It didn't even break. In early 1943, during its first major combat over Marcus Island, Hellcats showed their teeth. The Japanese scrambled a formation of Zeros to intercept an American strike group. The battle was quick and brutal. Within minutes, 5 Zeros fell into the sea, their once invincible agility useless against the Hellcat's raw speed and firepower. The Americans lost none. Reports began to reach Japanese command that something had changed. Pilots described a new Grumman type that climbed like a devil and could absorb bullets as if armored by fate itself. For the first time, fear began to whisper in the cockpits of the Imperial Navy. What they didn't know was that this new type had been built for this exact moment. Every weakness that had doomed earlier American fighters was eliminated. The Hellcat had self-sealing tanks, cockpit armor, and 6.50 caliber Browning machine guns that could shred a Zero before it even entered firing range. And unlike the Zero, which demanded fragile precision, the Hellcat was forgiving, a machine that turned rookie pilots into killers. One veteran pilot, James Hugh Flatley, called it an airplane that makes a good pilot great and a poor pilot good. In 1944, over the Philippine Sea, that truth would be proven beyond all doubt. The largest carrier battle in history was about to unfold. On June 19th, the Japanese launched nearly 400 planes against the American fleet. They came in waves, a storm of metal and ambition, their goal, to crush U.S. naval air power once and for all. The Hellcats waited. When radar picked up the incoming blips, American flight decks erupted into controlled chaos. Pilots sprinted, engines roared, and within minutes, hundreds of Hellcats climbed into the sunlit Pacific sky. What followed would be remembered as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. The Zeros dived with their old confidence, tight turns, sweeping rolls, but the Hellcats met them head-on. Their armor held firm under gunfire. Their return bursts tore the Zeros apart like paper. One by one, Japan's best aces vanished in smoke trails. By the end of the day, 75% of the attacking Japanese aircraft were destroyed. 350 planes gone, many with pilots who had trained since the 1930s. The Americans lost fewer than 30. The Hellcat had done what no one thought possible. It had broken the myth of the Zero. Even veteran Japanese pilots, once gods of the sky, admitted defeat. They called the Hellcat the beast with 9 lives. From that battle forward, Japan's air power began to collapse. The skies over the Pacific that once echoed with the shrill cry of Zeros were now ruled by the thunder of Hellcats. And yet, behind every victory was the same story, a simple, unromantic truth of engineering and endurance. The Hellcat was not elegant, not poetic. It was a tool built for war, designed to save the lives of men who had once been outmatched. Inside its cockpit, a 20-year-old farm boy from Kansas or a mechanic from Brooklyn could stand toe-to-toe with Japan's finest and live to tell the tale. Grumman's engineers had given them more than an aircraft, they had given them equality in the sky. By 1945, the Hellcat had achieved an almost impossible kill ratio, 19-1. Nearly 5,000 Japanese planes had fallen to its guns. The very pilots who once mocked the clumsy American machines now faced their extinction at the hands of one. The proud empire that had once claimed aerial dominance now watched its best fighters vanish over island after island. Truk, Saipan, Iwo Jima, Okinawa. In every battle, the Hellcat was there, roaring like an iron angel, its wings streaked with oil, salt, and fire. When Japan finally surrendered, the once feared Zero had long since disappeared, replaced by wrecks rusting in jungle airfields and beneath coral reefs. But the Hellcat, it returned home, a survivor. Many were melted down or scrapped, but a few still fly today, their engines rumbling with the ghostly echo of the Pacific War. They are relics of a time when the fate of nations was written in dogfights above the sea. And somewhere in that vast blue silence, the spirits of both Zero and Hellcat pilots still chase each other through memory's clouds, the hunters and the hunted, bound forever by the same endless sky.